I was 18 years old, I ended up having my first boyfriend. His name was James, and I felt like I struck gold with him. He was 19, sweet, was tall and slender, eyes like sapphires, light skin, and long black hair. I was also his first girlfriend, as he was adorably shy. We hit it off very quickly, becoming official by maybe the third day after meeting. When he'd greet me, he always had a beautiful smile when he'd say my name. We'd always meet up before and after classes and at lunch, kissing and making out together. I honestly thought I was in love with him. The only problem was his mother. Her name was Debbie. She was 42 and widowed for several years. As James was an only child, she seemed overprotective of him. A month after our relationship began, the weird stuff began. One day, James and I were hanging out together after classes, and when I heard someone impatiently honking their car's horn, I looked behind us and I saw Debbie seated in the car. She was honking her horn and giving me a strange look. It was a look of suspicion and a bit of hate, which threw me off. She honked once again, and it was hard. She waved an arm like she was telling James, "Let's go." Suddenly, James stood up and said, "I'm sorry, babe, but my mom's here. I'll see you later." He rushed over, practically jumping into her car. I could hear her shout at him, "Jimmy, who the hell is that girl? Your girlfriend or something?" His response made me feel uneasy. "Yes, she is, but don't worry. You're my number one, mommy." They drove away, leaving me wondering what to think. I still loved James and wanted our relationship to work, but over the days and weeks that followed, the weird stuff continued. He eventually stopped hanging out between classes because his mother might need him. I tolerated this, but I was uncomfortable by his own devotion to his mother. One time I asked him if we could have a date somewhere else. His response was, "If we do go out, mom's got to go with us." I confronted him about that once, and we had a big fight. He said he was all she had, and he was unwilling to separate from her. I reminded him that I was his girlfriend and needed time with him too. A couple days later, we made up and, things improved. But 6 months after that, we became a couple. The worst occurred. On the school bleachers, we sat together kissing and cuddling, going as far as second base. We paused once, holding each other. I whispered into his ear that I love him, and I'll never forget his response in my ear, "I love you too, Debbie." I pretty much threw him away from me in shock and disgust. He said his mother's name, not mine. Grossed out, I stood up, shouting, and I asked him, "What the hell is wrong with you? You said your mother's name." He honestly looked very embarrassed, but his response was the last straw. He said, "Oh my God, baby, I'm sorry, but you're a way better kisser than my mother." I had enough and I began to turn and walk around the bleachers. At the bottom row, I heard him plead, "Baby, please, I love you." I glanced at him, snarled, and I flipped him off. I continued walking away, never looking back. I never saw James again after that, as he dropped out of college shortly. I went on with my life and I didn't think about him at all, until 10 years later. Scanning Facebook one day, I became curious and I looked him up. It was a move I regretted. His profile photo made me wonder if that was actually the same guy, but it was. He was 29, had gained a lot of weight, a terrible complexion. His once beautiful black hair was now a greasy ponytail. He was unemployed and still living with his mother. I then viewed his profile pictures and instantly regretted that. The first was titled, "My Mommy." To my horror, it was filled with weird and honestly creepy photos of his mother. The worst was the newest photo, taken a few hours earlier. It featured his mother standing in the doorway, wearing a sheer lingerie nightie and nothing underneath. It was titled, "My Mommy in the Morning." Sickened, I viewed the other photo file. The contents made my jaw drop. The photos featured various body parts of James that showed scratches, cuts, bruising, different colors, and even marks that looked like burns. Turns out James was a little self-harmer and he punished himself frequently. The newest photo was 2 hours old and showed a nasty cigarette burn on his wrist. It was entitled, "I made mommy angry today. This is my punishment. Sorry, mommy." I immediately exited the Facebook page, horrified and nauseous. I didn't know what to think. I obviously didn't want to see that again. And I still haven't, even after getting a friend request from him. Somehow, he knew that I had seen his page. So I denied him and vowed to ignore him. In 2017, I got a message from him. His mother had just died and he was eager, begging to see me again. She had left him a lot of money and he was a millionaire, it turned out. I almost hated to do it, but I told him to go away and honestly, I blocked him. I heard nothing from him over a year. Then I got a strange email. It was from a man saying that he was James' uncle. It was Debbie's brother, Mike. What he told me disturbed me. He had gone to check on James after not hearing from him in 2 months. He found James in the second floor bedroom, lying on his mother's bed, wearing her nightgown, and his hair was in curlers. He had been staring up at the ceiling, almost in a trance, babbling, "Mommy, mommy, when are you coming home, mommy? I'm waiting, mommy." When James had seen his uncle staring at him in shock, James had said to him, "Hi, Uncle Mike. Have you seen Mama? Is she coming home?" Mike told him that he called his mother on the phone downstairs. James had deemed delighted, but Mike had called a services crew and eventually hauled James away to a sanitarium. He remains there now, and I can honestly hope that he's getting the help that he requires. I really feel bad for James. His entire life was wasted because of a woman, his own mother, who refused to let him live his life.
I used to think of my work as this sanctuary, believe it or not. Sure, it was this big corporate grind, but it had its perks. I worked for IT for this massive company. It spanned multiple buildings and housed so many employees that some of the faces almost were a blur to me. I knew most of the departments, but still there were a lot of folks that I barely even recognized. People whose names I never even learned. For all I knew, some of them might have been ghosts haunting the break rooms and the copy machines. My days would fall into this comfortable rhythm. Come in, clock in, drink the coffee that tasted faintly of burnt toast, and deal with the same endless parade of forgotten passwords and mysteriously broken printers. Then, lunch, my sacred hour. I'd retreat to the break room or the little outdoor seating area with that same eclectic crew. A graphic designer named Tracy, an HR guy named Max, and Melanie from sales, who always had these wild stories about her clients. They were pretty much my buffer against the monotony. Routine kept the days manageable though. Even the constant hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the ever-present whir of the server room because of that background noise. The chaos of IT didn't really bother me too much. In fact, I kind of thrived on it. If anything, it's the unpredictable human drama that sometimes spilled into the office that would give me pause. People are strange creatures. You think you really know somebody, sitting right next to you day after day, week after week, year after year, and then something happens. A raised voice in the hallway, a slammed door, and suddenly they're a complete stranger. It was on one of those otherwise remarkable afternoons that the strange energy in the air hit me immediately. I was elbow deep in some kind of outdated desktop tower when I noticed the quiet. Normally, it wasn't loud or anything, but the office had this low din of conversation. Phones ringing, keyboards clacking, but for some reason, not today. Today, there was something different. A tension that I couldn't quite place was lingering in the air. Tracy was always the one cluing me in, pulling me aside during my lunch break, their usual conspiratorial grin. "You hear about that drama?" she whispered, leaning in close enough that I could smell that peppermint gum that she was always chewing. Drama? I'd asked, pretending not to care, but of course I cared. The office gossip was almost like a shot of caffeine. Nicole? In accounting? Tracy's eyes darted around, scanning for anybody eavesdropping. She found out her husband's been screwing Lindsay from marketing. You know Lindsay, right? The blonde girl, always wearing those ridiculous heels. I didn't know Lindsay, or maybe I did. Again, like I mentioned before, faces were pretty hard to place for me sometimes, but the way Tracy was explaining it and telling it to me, this was almost like the scandal of the century, so I had to play along, act like I knew her. Yeah, I think so. So, what happened? She lost it, Tracy said, her voice dropping even lower, like full-on meltdown in the parking lot this morning. Screaming, cussing, the whole 9 yards. Security had to get involved. Seriously? I said as I shook my head. What, are we still in high school or something? I know, right? Tracy chuckled. But there was a nervous energy about it. Anyway, the word is Lindsay and Nicole's husband, what's his name? Evan. They both got sent home. Nicole too. HR's in overdrive trying to clean it all up. As the day went on, that story unraveled in bits and pieces, like it does, passing like a baton between the departments. By the time it finally reached my desk, the tension in the air had thickened completely, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the kind of story that would just end like most of them do. The rest of that day passed in whispers and darting glances across the room. Every conversation that everybody was having seemed to orbit that same event, each version of the story slightly warped by the teller's perspective. By the time I finally clocked out for the day, the office was like a pressure cooker. And for some reason, I still was thinking about the image of Nicole screaming in the parking lot, voice breaking against the concrete walls of the building. I personally really didn't know her well, but I do remember fixing her laptop a few times. She was polite, if not maybe a little distant. But now I couldn't stop wondering what she looked like during the moment of complete unraveling. The next morning, the office was really off. It wasn't the usual awkwardness that followed a big blow-up. It was even deeper. I got to my desk early, booted up my computer, hoping to just lose myself in work. But almost immediately after that, Max from HR appeared in my peripheral vision. He leaned up against the cubicle wall. His face was pale and drawn. Man, he said, shaking his head. I'm assuming you heard about what happened. Let me guess, I replied, not even looking up. More drama. Nicole, Max said. The weight of his voice made me pause now, though. I swiveled in my chair to face him. She disappeared yesterday after that fight in the parking lot. Didn't go home, didn't answer her phone. Her husband, Evan, went looking for her, but... Wait, I interrupted. Evan, wasn't he the one that was cheating? Max nodded. Yeah. He left for work early to avoid the fallout. I guess he thought he'd wait for Nicole to cool off and come home. Okay, so what happened? Max hesitated, glancing around as if he was afraid somebody might overhear him. Word is, Evan and Lindsay met up last night, probably to talk things over or through, I don't know, make plans, whatever. Anyway, Nicole found them. The way he said it, it made my stomach drop. Found them. Yeah, Max said, voice barely even above a whisper. She killed them, both of them. Those words didn't even really register at first. They just kind of hung in the air above me. What do you mean, killed them? I asked, even though I knew exactly what he meant. She shot Lindsay, Max said, right in the chest, and Evan stabbed him multiple times. Cops found her wandering near the scene covered in blood. I was just staring at Max now, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to crack a grin and admit this was some kind of sick joke, but he never did. Jesus, I muttered, leaning back in my chair. Yeah, Max said. For the rest of the morning, every time I tried to focus on work, my mind would wander back to Nicole. I pictured her standing over Lindsay and Evan, her hands slick with blood, her face twisted with rage, or maybe grief. I couldn't really decide which was worse. By lunchtime, the entire office was buzzing with the news. Tracy cornered me in the break room, her usual grin replaced by the look of genuine unease. "I'm assuming you heard?" she said, as if there was any chance I hadn't. "Yeah," I said. "Max told me earlier." "Can you believe it?" Tracy said. "I mean, I knew she was upset, but she trailed off, shaking her head. "Nobody could have seen this coming," I said, even though, as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure I even believed them. People don't just snap like that, do they? There has to be something simmering beneath the surface, something that builds and builds until it finally explodes. "Do you think she'll get the death penalty?" Tracy asked. "I don't know. I'm not a lawyer." But I'll admit that thought did linger in my mind. Nicole sitting in a courtroom, her hands cuffed, her face blank, as a judge read her sentence. That felt way too big, too dramatic to be even real. But yet, it was. Lindsay and Evan were both dead, and Nicole was in custody. The rest of us were left to pick up the pieces, to make sense of the senseless. The office was so quiet that day. The only time people spoke, it was in hushed tones, their voices muffled by the thick tension in the air. Occasionally, I would hear snippets of conversation, somebody speculating about Nicole's mental state, or somebody else claiming they knew something was off. They'd known it all along, like everybody always says. Everyone had their opinion, but nobody seemed to have any answers. I was exhausted when I clocked out, not just physically, but emotionally. The weight of that day just pressed down on me, and I could not shake the grief. I felt weird, distant. I'm sure some of you understand exactly what I'm talking about. The next day at the office, it felt like I stepped inside a crime scene. Everything looked the same, the gray cubicles, buzzing fluorescent lights, the faint smell of somebody's reheated curry wafting from the break room. But it was definitely different. There's a weight in the air, a suffocating stillness that made every sound, every click of a keyboard, every cough feel deafening. I clocked in as usual, and the motions were robotic. I made my way to my desk, avoiding eye contact with anybody. Not that anybody was looking. Most people were glued to their monitors or huddled in these small, tense groups, still whispering so low that I don't even know how they heard it. Around mid-morning, I finally got the courage to approach Max. He was hunched over his desk, staring blankly at a screen. "Hey," I said, leaning up against the edge of his cubicle. "You got any updates?" Max looked up and his eyes were bloodshot, and he didn't answer me immediately. He just rubbed the temples of his head, trying to massage the words into existence. "Yeah," he finally said. His voice was heavy though. "They're saying Nicole's not talking, not to the cops, not to anybody, just sitting in her cell, staring at the wall." I nodded slowly, unsure of what to say next. "What about Lindsay and Evan?" Max swallowed hard. "The details are all over the news, man. Lindsay was shot point blank range in the chest and probably didn't even see it coming. Evan, he fought back, and that's why she stabbed him so many times. They found the knife in her car and there was blood everywhere." "Jesus," I muttered again. "Yeah," Max responded. By the time lunch rolled around, I wasn't hungry, but I went to the break room anyway. The usual group was there: Tracy, Melanie, even a couple of others who rarely even joined us. The table was now crowded. "Did you see the news?" Tracy asked as I sat down. "No, not yet. I haven't really looked." I'd seen some headlines, some grainy photos of Nicole's mugshot, and the blood-slickened driveway where it all gone down. "They're saying she planned it," Tracy said, as she waited outside Lindsay's house for hours just watching. "Can you imagine?" I couldn't, or maybe I just didn't want to. People snap, Melanie said. You think you know somebody, but... She trailed off, just staring at her coffee. The conversation petered out after that. Nobody really had anything left to say, and honestly, I was grateful for it. I finished my coffee and went back to my desk and just tried to lose myself in work. To this day, that was the worst work week of my life. Nothing compares to it. And the craziest thing is that people still talk about it. A lot of us have and will work here for a long time, their entire careers. These people talk in circles like the blood is still warm. And all I can do is just try my best to avoid it. It's said and done. Past is the past. But every time I walk past Nicole's old desk, every time I see that empty chair where Lindsay used to sit, I feel the same grief that I did back then. And from my understanding, she's still in prison.
I was driving alone from my friend's place all the way back home. He lived about an hour away at some really remote house. It was around 1 or 2 a.m. I can't remember exactly, but I was really tired and almost just wanted to sleep over at his place. I would have had to call off work though, which wasn't really an option. Because of where he lived, most of the drive was through large farmlands. I had some music playing to keep myself awake, and I just stared at the empty road ahead. About 20 minutes in though, my headlights lit up something right in the middle of the road. I slowed down, slamming on my brakes a bit harder than I had to. It was a suitcase, like a full, unopened suitcase, just standing up in the middle of the road. I probably stared at it for an odd amount of time because I was so tired and caught off guard by it. I decided to just go into the oncoming lane and go around it. I really wasn't in the mood to get out and move it or anything. It was definitely odd that it was standing upright like that, but it had to have just fallen out of someone's truck and happened to land like that. I couldn't think of any other reason. I kept driving, thinking about it for a little bit, but ultimately forgetting about it pretty quickly. Maybe 5 minutes passed. The roads were still quiet. I was just cruising along, but then again, something came up in my headlights. This time, it was a truck, parked in the middle of the lane. None of its lights or blinkers were on. If I didn't have my high beams on, this could have been dangerously close. I stopped behind them and waited for a second, then honked a few times. The truck didn't move at all. I didn't even see any movement inside of it through the back window. After waiting for 30 seconds, I started to slowly go around it. As I did, I noticed it had a few large dents and scrapes on the side. I couldn't tell if it was from a recent accident or not. It could have been one of those old trucks that just never repaired any of its parts. More concerning though, I didn't see anyone inside the truck. It was still dark looking through the windows, but I didn't see any shape or outline of anyone sitting in either the front or the back. I pulled further up and in front of it, getting back onto my side of the road, then slowed even more to look around. It was still just farmland in all directions. Why would someone park right there and leave their vehicle? There was nothing here. I felt strange about it, kind of creeped out honestly. I continued down the road. I just had a bad feeling about it, and I didn't want to stay too long to see it through. After that, I was definitely more awake. Was the suitcase and the truck somehow connected, or were they both just conveniently in the middle of the road? I never saw anyone on the side of the road going back to get the suitcase, so I don't know. But I only made it another minute before I was forced to stop for a third time. There was a person in the road. He was standing in my lane and waving his arms at me to stop. He looked early 40s and pretty disheveled. Messy hair, cuts and scrapes on his hands and arms, and overall just not in good shape. Once my tires stopped moving, he smiled and walked up to my window.
Hey,
"Did you see a truck not too far back that way?" I said yes, I did. "Think you could give me a lift back there?" Before answering, I asked why it was parked in the road like that, and what he was doing out here, which I felt like, given the circumstance, these were reasonable questions to ask. The man stumbled over his words for a second, before settling on saying he ran out of gas and was trying to walk to a gas station. But then, why would I drive him back to the truck? Wouldn't he have asked me to drive him to the gas station? He kept talking though, like he wasn't letting me think too hard about it. Now it was me stumbling over my words, trying to think of an excuse to say no, but my eyes wandered behind him and happened to see something sticking out of the crops on the side of the road. It looked like the tail end of a small car. It was deep into the crops. I could only see one of the rear headlights slightly reflecting the light from my car. I didn't know what the hell was going on, but I knew whatever it was wasn't good. I rolled the window up, and the man instantly went from smiling to frowning, and he started yelling and hitting the window. I pulled away and sped down the road. I got my phone out quickly after and called the cops. Reportedly, the truck was gone when they got there, but the car I saw in the crops was still there, and I guess the scene was far worse than I imagined. That was someone else's car, and the driver in it was no longer alive. Not from a crash, though. It seemed they likely picked up a hitchhiker, the guy I saw, and unfortunately, that was the last thing they ever did. It's assumed that the suitcase and the truck in the road had something to do with getting the car to pull over and pick him up. It's not for certain, though, but obviously the hitchhiker I saw was not telling the truth about his truck running out of gas. It all likely was just an act of violence by some crazy guy for no real reason, which makes it even more terrifying that I was that close to him, and he wanted me to let him in my car, just like the other guy had. The man was never identified.
This happened about 3 years ago, and it was just after I had gotten into university. I was really proud of myself, and I had managed to pass a really difficult entrance exam, and I was looking forward to trying life in the city alone for the first time. I knew it was going to be a big step, but I was ready for it. I come from the countryside, so it was going to be all new for me and tough to leave the little support network and friends that I made there. My first year at university was a mix of excitement and adjustment. I made friends with some other students, and my mom would often come to visit, using my place as a kind of hotel. I didn't mind. It was nice to hear how my family was doing and see her, and I guess it was her way of making sure that I was okay, and I guess that she missed me too. When I started my second year of university in April, my mom came to visit again. Apparently one of her favorite artists had a concert nearby, so she decided to use my place as her hotel, as per usual. I thought at the time, oh great, here we go again, but since she sends me money every month, I couldn't really complain. I didn't want to risk having my allowance reduced, and those were the days. Now that morning she said, "I'm going to the concert today, so I'll be back pretty late." Okay. And out of nowhere she said, "So, how do you feel about this apartment?" "What do you mean?" I asked, a little taken aback by the sudden question. "Any weird neighbors or noisy people or anything?" "I don't know," I replied. Between my part-time job, classes, and parties, I hardly knew who lived in my building. But I did remember that there was a girl from the same university on my floor. She seemed pretty outgoing, always having friends over for drinks, and I envied her a bit for that. "Well, whatever. You got work today, right?" my mom asked. "Yeah," I nodded. "Try not to stay out too late." "Okay." I wanted to tell her to come home early too, but I just kept that thought to myself. When I got back that night and said I'm back, the apartment was pitch black. It was 8:30 p.m. and my mom wasn't back yet. I was hungry, but since it was a bit warm and sweaty that day, I decided to just take a shower first. While I was in the shower, I heard some rattling sounds, and I figured my mom had come back. I saw a dark figure moving through the frosted glass door as she entered the bathroom. "Oh, you're back early, Mom," I called out, but there was no response. "Hey, do you want to go get some ramen?" I asked, and I heard a ch sound, like someone clicking their tongue, and with that, the dark figure disappeared. What's up with that? I thought, stepping out of the bathroom. She usually loved ramen. As soon as I got out of the bathroom, a smell hit me immediately. "Ew, that stinks," I blurted out. It smelled like kerosene, which was weird because I didn't use a kerosene heater. As I was wondering why, I heard the front door unlocking and my mom walked in. "You came in just to go back outside again?" I asked, confused. And she looked at me, kind of puzzled. "What do you mean? Didn't you just come in a few minutes ago?" "No, I just got here," she said, holding bags filled with concert merchandise. "So who was that in the bathroom?" My mind raced as I told my mom what happened. Panicked, she called the police, and they came right away. We quickly discovered that nothing was stolen and that there were no signs of forced entry. I guess I didn't fully close the door when I walked in, or something. And the police suggested maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe a neighbor had one too many drinks and walked in what they thought was their apartment but got it wrong, realized their error and left. And my mom was furious, but it made me wonder if I had imagined it all. Maybe I was just tired. I wasn't able to fully convince myself of that because of that strange smell of kerosene. The week after that strange incident was one of the longest and most nerve-wracking of my life. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off, and I found myself jumping at every little noise and double-checking the locks on my door multiple times a day. I even contemplated moving to a different place, but my lease wasn't up, and finding a new apartment in the city wasn't easy or cheap. A week after that strange incident, something terrible happened. The girl who lived on my floor was murdered by the middle-aged man who lived below us. After he went through that terrible act, he set his apartment on fire, and he went with it. The news and internet said the girl had riled up other neighbors by having parties often and making lots of noise, and that's why she was targeted. But that wasn't really true. Even when she had friends over, you could barely hear them. The revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't help but wonder if the dark figure I saw that day was actually him. Maybe I was his initial target, but he backed off because my mom was there and would come back soon. The idea that I could have been in that poor girl's shoes kept me awake at night, and for days I replayed the incident in my head, trying to find some clarity, some sign that could tell me what really happened. I remembered every detail, the sound at the door, the figure behind the frosted glass, and the smell of kerosene. It was all too real to have been a figment of my imagination. I'll never know for sure what happened that night, and that uncertainty is something that I've had to live with. The police closed the case quickly after the man died, labeling him as a deranged individual with a grudge against the noisy neighbors. They didn't dig any deeper, and there were no leads, no witnesses besides me, and I wasn't even sure of what I saw. All I can do is pray for the girl who lost her life. May she rest in peace. Even now, years later, I occasionally think back to that night. This happened approximately 10 years ago, around 2015 to 2016. I was living with someone at the time who worked an opposite schedule as me. He worked graveyard shift and I worked during the day, so when I was getting up and getting ready to leave for work, he was just coming home. On the nights during the week, I obviously would be at home by myself, and one night during the week I was feeling especially lonely and my favorite toy unfortunately broke and died, so I decided to drive downtown to the 24-hour adult store to buy another one. The town I live in is a mid-sized suburban town filled with mostly residential areas. The main downtown area was essentially one small area on the way to the freeway, and my apartment was 10 minutes away. I pulled into the parking lot behind the adult store. The parking lot was dark and had multiple entries all around that led to the bars and restaurants as well as the store. After parking my car, I walked towards the entrance of the store, which was on the street, and to do so, I had to walk towards the driveway that I came in to park. And upon walking to the entrance, I noticed a man standing by himself smoking a cigarette. It was 1 a.m. and not normal to just see only one person standing by themselves there, though I figured he was one of the patrons from one of the bars on the block taking a cigarette break. And as I walked passing him, he says, "Hi," to which I responded with a very quiet hi, but didn't make eye contact with him. And upon passing him, I had a better look at his appearance. He had a shaved head, wore a long white t-shirt with shorts hanging past his knees, and he had a pair of sneakers accompanied with some tube socks that covered his shins. This is not unusual to see in my town, but I was more concerned that he was sitting by himself and instantly took an interest in me as I walked past him. After passing him and continuing to walk to the store, I saw out of the corner of my eye the man proceeding to follow behind me. When I say follow, I don't mean he coincidentally was walking behind me. He immediately followed right behind me as soon as I passed him, making a point to maintain the same walking speed. I did not know this man's intentions, but a man by himself that late at night is a recipe for trouble. And as I looked down the dark and empty street, I weighed out my options of where to go. Initially, I thought, keep walking so he doesn't know that you're going to the adult store. But since it was 1 a.m. and there was no one on the street, I thought that to be probably more dangerous. Then I thought, just go in one of the bars. But then I thought that that would give him an easier introduction to approach me. So then I realized my best bet was to continue into the store where I knew it was well lit and people could see me. I proceeded to shop for what I came there for, and the man entered the store behind me but hung out at the front of the store so as not to look like he was following me around. He wasn't even pretending to shop. He literally just sat at the front waiting. And as I was shopping, I heard the man make sort of a s sound, to which I ignored. And he wasn't getting the message, and he continued to make this S sound as I continued to shop without noticing. And eventually I walked up to the cashier, who was completely oblivious to what was going on, and I tried to whisper to the cashier, "Do you know what that man, or does he work here?" The cashier asked me to repeat what I was saying, and asked again, but still spoke in a quiet voice. Not understanding my attempt to be discreet, the cashier responded, "I can't hear you, say it again." At this point, I felt like my cover was blown, so in a more normal tone, I told the cashier the man in front followed me from outside and won't leave me alone. I explained my car was parked in the lot behind the store and I didn't feel comfortable going to my car, and the cashier said okay. The cash wrap area was an enclosed square-shaped counter to maintain distance between the staff and the customers. The cashier walked to the front by where the man was, and from behind the counter told the man to leave. He then came up and reassured me that he told the man to go away, though the man did not, in fact, go away. He continued to stay there. Given that I didn't want him to follow me to my car, I stayed in the store and pretended that I was still shopping, even though I had already found what I came for. I would occasionally glance at the front to see if the man was still there, and he was. And I kept going up to the cashier, explaining that the man hadn't left, so he went back up to the front to talk to him. I heard the cashier say, "All right, enough already, leave the store." And while he was doing this, I went to the far back end of the store to remain out of sight, and by the time I circled back to the cashier, I noticed the man was no longer there. The cashier said that he repeatedly and more assertively told the man to leave. He said the man claimed that he didn't understand English. The cashier then pulled a baton that he kept under the counter for protection and held it over his head and asked the man, "Do you understand this?" To which the man finally left the store. I made my purchase but was still worried about walking to my car, even though I was parked in one of the first spaces near the driveway entrance. The cashier pointed at a small TV behind him that had 4 angles of CCTV footage, and he assured me that the man was gone and told me to come back into the store if I saw him again. He also said he would watch as I walked to my car. Even though I would have felt more comfortable if he had walked me to my car, I understood that he was by himself and couldn't leave the store unattended with customers. and after making my purchase, I sped walk to my car, and I always have my keys ready when walking to my car, so I promptly pressed unlock on my car remote, got in, placed my bag of purchases on the passenger seat, and proceeded to start the car. Once my car turned on, I took off the emergency brake, put the car in reverse, and while putting on my seatbelt, I looked in my side view mirror to back out. It was at this point that I saw that same man in the mirror, full-on speed walking right toward my driver's side door. And as soon as I saw him, I hit the gas and violently pulled out of the parking space. I pulled out so fast that it startled him, stopping him dead in his tracks, and he was now standing right next to my driver's side door as I continued to pull out. I gave him the most serious dead stare I could because I know most predators feed off the fear of their victims. The stare must have worked. As soon as he saw me pulling out while staring at him, he turned his head back toward the driveway entrance and proceeded to walk back to where he had been standing. He had a look of defeat on his face. My face, however, was overcome with relief. I pulled out of the parking lot and took myself back home. And I felt a bit ashamed for being out so late by myself, and I did tell my boyfriend about the incident when he came home at 6 a.m. He also agreed that going out that late alone wasn't the smartest decision, and I'm no longer with that person, but I still live in the same town, though I never leave my home for anything past 9 o'clock anymore. While the town I live in isn't the most dangerous, there are still enough crimes that occur here that it's also not considered the safest. I'm a 19-year-old female living in the Pacific Northwest. A couple of months ago, I was looking for extra work because my hours at my regular job were terrible. I'm quiet, anxious, and don't have any friends, so, of course, I turned to Craigslist. I knew the site could be sketchy, but I was desperate for side gigs and hadn't had any luck as someone with no skills and not willing to do OnlyFans. One ad caught my attention. It offered $50 for someone to take photos of a property using either a camera or something above an iPhone 12. I have an iPhone 14, promising that it would only take an hour or two. I emailed the poster and soon got a text back, and the man said that I seemed like the perfect fit and invited me over that same day. What's funny is I actually made a post on r/tooafraidtoask asking if it was a dumb idea, and everyone told me to take a person with me. I didn't, and deleted that post shortly after. The house was about 20 minutes outside of town, surrounded by dense forests. It was small and run down, but nothing really raised alarms, and the man who greeted me looked like he was maybe in his mid-50s, unremarkable. He invited me inside, and the house was completely empty. No furniture, just dust and dirt. I asked where to start taking photos, but he kept dodging the question, making small talk and asking personal questions about me instead. My anxiety was building, so I kept the small talk going, but then he began staring at me intensely. I dropped my phone at one point when we eventually started taking photos throughout the house, and when he picked it up, he held on to it a little too long before giving it back. Unprompted while taking photos of the master bedroom, he brushed my face with his hand and complimented my skin. I knew it was stupid coming here, but at that point, my blood truly ran cold, and I was done making excuses in my head. I made a quick excuse to leave, something about my mom, but when I turned toward the door, he grabbed my arm. I still have the picture that I took after the ordeal of the bruises on my forearm, and it felt like it was going to get snapped in half. I had brought a small knife for self-defense, a gift from my paranoid mom who would have never let me come here if she had known. And without thinking, I pulled it out and stabbed him in the arm. It was released with the push of a small button, and he let go, swinging at my arm with the knife, but I already was running out of the house. I got into my car and drove until I reached the gas station, and my heart was calm. I called the police and explained everything. They did take it seriously, and I came in to make a report and answer some questions. They searched that property in the surrounding forest, but didn't find him, and the house had turned out to be abandoned, and in the basement, they found a pack of zip ties. A report was made, but I know he's still out there. I call sometimes for updates, but it's never anything of substance. I've never told anyone about this other than the police, not even my mom. And I know typing this I sound pretty unbothered, but that was the first time anything like that has ever happened to me, and I have trouble leaving my house most days. I decided to type this out here as maybe a way of getting it off my chest since it plagues my thoughts constantly.
I had this whole day off. It was cold and wet outside, as it had been raining off and on all day. I stayed in and played video games, going about my day as I normally would. Around 5, the rain had picked up, and there was a bit of lightning in the distance. I cooked up some dinner, then decided to watch a horror movie while I had the fitting ambience of the storm outside. I shut off the lights and spent the next 2 hours on the couch. The storm definitely got worse over that time. There weren't any outages or anything, but it was just really coming down hard outside, with heavy lightning strikes nearby. It was around 10 o'clock. I wasn't really tired or ready for bed yet, but I got up to stretch my legs and refill my water. When I turned around toward the hallway, I immediately saw something move, like a shadow on the wall. It was quick, just a split second, too short for me to really understand what I saw, or even be sure that what I saw was real. I froze in place for a moment, then walked over and looked around, only to find nothing but an empty hallway. Maybe it was a flicker of light coming through the window from a far-off lightning strike. I also just got finished with the horror movie, so I could have been a little on edge and just seeing things. I honestly chalked it up to nothing and forgot about it after less than a minute. I refilled my water and checked on the storm going on outside. The trees were blowing around like crazy, and the rain was basically flooding the roads. We didn't get many big storms like this around here, so it was always interesting when we did. Our town definitely wasn't built for them. I went back to the couch and turned on YouTube to try and ease myself into getting sleepy. I wasn't too tuned in to what I was watching. I guess I was kind of spacing out or whatever. But then again, I saw a shadow on the wall behind the TV move. It was like something behind me just peeked around the corner for a split second. I jolted my head around and looked at the opening to the living room. Nothing was there. I got up and walked over, looking all around that area, but I saw nothing at all. I didn't know what the hell was going on. It was like I was just seeing things, but I never had it happen twice like that before. Was I just sleepy? I didn't feel like it. I thought that the horror movie and the storm outside would make for a chill night, but this was far from it now. I still thought it was nothing, but there was that tiny feeling in the back of my mind that it wasn't nothing. I spent another 15 minutes on the couch, but decided to go to bed afterward. I shut off the TV and headed upstairs. I still wasn't tired, and even less so after everything happening, so I hopped in the shower to relax myself before getting in bed. I turned on the water and tried to calm down. I was in there for maybe 5 minutes. Through the water, a sudden thud rang through the house. It was violent and loud, vibrating through the floors. My whole body shivered as I shut off the water and quickly got dressed. With the water off, the house was quiet now, not even the slightest sound. I felt like my ears were ringing just from the disturbing silence that followed the thud. I slowly made my way into the hallway and then down the stairs. I walked through the living room and then the kitchen. The back door was barely hanging on from the top hinge, completely open, and splinters of wood covered the floor under it. The 2 other hinges looked like they were ripped out of the wooden doorway. I ran up to my room and called 911, locking myself in the bathroom. That whole time I waited, I thought I was trapped inside my home with someone, but when the cops arrived, we quickly realized that wasn't the case. The door wasn't ripped off the hinges from the outside, it was from the inside. It was like someone angrily left, swinging the door open so hard that it slammed back into the wall and ripped the screws out of the doorway. Whoever it was had been inside my house that whole night. Likely the shadows I saw were them inside my home, probably moving as soon as I looked at them. I have no idea how long they were there for, or what they were doing in my home, watching me for. It's also really strange that they destroyed my door like that, like they were frustrated. I've never slept well in this house since then. This was last winter. I can't recall exactly when, but I know it was snowing a lot during this week, and I barely left the house because of it. I worked what I think is called hybrid, so sometimes from home and sometimes in the office. Because of the snow, I stayed home this whole week and worked from a small desk in my bedroom. My house was small, only 1 story, and just 2 bedrooms. On this day, I got up and made coffee, then sat down to work, and pretty much stayed at my desk until 8 p.m. It was windy and snowing outside the whole day. When I finally got up, I made dinner, then cleaned up around the house, then went outside to bring the trash bins down to the curb. As I was walking back to the front door, I noticed the snow on the left side of my house looked strange. Like everywhere else, it was piled up and flat, but over there, something clearly had messed with it. So I walked over to get a closer look, and could quickly recognize that it was a line of shoe prints going through the snow. This was a little concerning, because it was really close to my house, not just like kind of in the area. I followed the prints, going all the way down the side of my house, until there were suddenly no more. At the end, it looked like they'd moved around in this one spot for a while, and it was directly outside the window to my bedroom that I was working in. This was extremely creepy. I mean, it was cold, windy, and snowing. Why was anyone even outside walking around to begin with, and going up to my window? Thankfully, I had the blinds shut, but you could still kinda see through the cracks. Right on the other side of the window was my desk, so they could have been watching me. I hoped I was just overthinking it. I went back inside and warmed up. I didn't exactly know what else to do about it. Obviously, they weren't there anymore, so there was nothing to do. I continued with my night, eventually going to bed around 11. I had checked out the window one last time before sleeping, and the snow had covered up all the tracks from before, and there were no new ones, so I felt better. I triple-checked that it was locked, then got in bed. I slept through the night. The first thing I did once I woke up was go over to the window and check again. My tired face immediately woke up. There were fresh prints in the snow again, right by the window. I quickly threw on my jacket and snow boots and ran outside. The prints were almost exactly the same as before, going up to the side of my house and piling up right under my window. I looked around at the empty blanket of snow that covered the rest of the ground near my house, but there were no signs of anything else or anyone nearby. I went back inside. I ended up calling the non-emergency police number to report what was going on. I knew they wouldn't be able to do anything, but I thought that at least if something did happen, they would be aware of the situation. After that, I had to work though. I tried to check out the window every so often, but the snow slowly filled in the shoe prints, and I never saw anything more. I got out of work at 8 again, so the sun had long set, and the night was cold and windy. I got up from my desk and went to the window, pushing aside the blinds and seeing flat, untouched snow. The relief I felt was immense. But my eyes floated down just as I was letting go of the blinds, and my heart nearly stopped. The latch was undone. It wasn't locked anymore. I couldn't believe it. I'd triple-checked it last night and never touched it since. I shakily reached my hand down and grabbed the handle. The window opened with ease. I felt my heart racing. They had to have unlocked it last time they were here, which was in the middle of the night. How did I not hear it? And did they get inside? I backed away and crept into the hallway. My eyes sifted through every inch of the hallway as I slowly made my way to the front door. I got my keys and put my boots on, then ran out to my car. I called the police and stayed in the driveway. I don't think my car could make it out of the snow, even if I wanted to leave. 10 long minutes later, an officer pulled up. He went inside to make sure it was clear. Time seemed to move extremely slow. I waited as the minutes passed. Once it got close to 5 whole minutes, I knew something was wrong. Then he finally came out with a man in handcuffs. Both the officer and the man were covered in blood, clearly having gotten into an altercation. The officer said he was hiding in a hallway closet and jumped him. The man was 45 and just had that creepy, evil look to him. There was no saying what he was trying to do, but clearly he was capable of violence. I don't know what would have happened had that gone on for any longer. I was visiting my parents over spring break. This was the first time I'd tried out Airbnb, since the city I was going to was small and Airbnbs were cheap there. I made the 2-day drive and pulled in just after the sun had set. As I parked in the driveway and got my stuff out of the car, I looked around at the neighborhood I was in. The atmosphere felt a little off. It was very dark and not busy in any way at all. No streetlights on the road and nobody walking around or driving. And the Airbnb home I was at was the only house with lights on. It wasn't even that late, but all the other houses were dark. There were maybe 1 or 2 lights in a couple of houses, and that was it. Maybe things around here were just different. I didn't know. I headed into the house and got my things unpacked. I had no plans for this night, aside from resting from the long drive and just getting comfortable at the rental. I ate some snacks and turned on a movie in the bedroom. A couple hours went by. It was probably around 9 or 10 when I heard something outside of the room. I paused the TV and waited a few seconds. Then I heard it again. It was someone knocking on the front door. I immediately checked my phone, thinking maybe I missed a call from the host, but I had nothing. I got up and went down to the front door. That whole time, they were continuously knocking, so it seemed like they actually needed me for something, and it wasn't just a salesman or whatever. I opened the door. There was a man in his 30s, wearing a black winter hat and a distressed red flannel. He looked confused when he saw me. I said hi. He sort of awkwardly smiled, then went back to a straight face. He mumbled something under his breath as he turned around and walked away. I just stood there in disbelief and watched him walk down to the road. I closed and locked the door. I really had no idea what to think about that. The way he was knocking over and over, only to just not say anything and leave, was weird. Maybe he had the wrong house and was just too awkward to say anything. I went back to the bedroom. The rest of that night was fine, and I got up early in the morning to go out and see my parents. I was out until 6. When I got back to the rental, I was pretty tired again, so I went to the bedroom and just watched TV and chilled for the rest of the night. But around 9 again, there was that same knocking at the front door. This time, I was more worried than confused. I still checked my phone again for any texts or calls, but there wasn't anything. I was a little more cautious, walking up to the door this time. I checked out the peep first, and it was the same guy. He was wearing the same hat and flannel. This time, I only cracked open the door and asked what he needed. The man's reaction was almost identical to last time, except it was more dramatic, like he really didn't expect to see me again. "Is everything okay? Was there someone you were looking for?" The man looked at me with a straight, hollow face. "No," he said in a monotone voice. He turned and walked away again. I really didn't know what that guy was looking for, or who he thought lived here, but it was getting creepy. Something about this was really strange, and I didn't like it at all. A couple hours went by. It was late, so I turned off the lights and went to bed. When I woke up, my eyes opened to the pitch-black bedroom. It was dark and quiet, still the middle of the night. I wasn't sure why I'd woken up, but I sat up and I started to hear something from outside, maybe like a whisper or something. Then there was a sudden knock at the front door. It was loud and harsh. I got up from the bed and went into the hallway. The loud hits against the door shook the whole house. As I quietly crept down the hall, I caught a glimpse of something move past one of the windows on the other side of the hallway. When I got to the end and looked out the door, I saw that same guy. But further back in the dark, there was someone else. They were clearly hiding, waiting for something. I felt my body going numb from the adrenaline spiking. I turned around to go back and get my phone, but instantly locked eyes with a man staring at me through the back window. I panicked and sprinted into the bedroom. I heard multiple footsteps start running around the house. Not just like a couple, it sounded like maybe a dozen men out there. As I called the police, I heard all the windows and doors around the house being moved and attempted to be opened. Several excruciating minutes went by as I listened to this group of men surround the house and try to force their way in before I heard sirens in the distance. All the men disappeared within seconds. With the place being an Airbnb, the police contacted the host, who seemed more annoyed than concerned. It was a little weird, considering the experience I just went through on his property, staying at his house. To sum it up though, they never figured out any more details. After the years, I think my best guess is that someone else had stayed at the Airbnb that knew the men that showed up. They probably thought he lived there, and when they saw me answer, they were confused. Maybe they were mad at the previous guy, or just wanted to talk to him and thought I was hiding him or something. Or they could have just been insane. The host was definitely a little strange, too. I wouldn't be surprised if the group had some beef with him and found this address was under his name. Whatever the true intentions were, I guess we'll never know.
Last year, I was living by myself in an apartment building. I lived on the second floor in a typical one-bedroom place. I worked many different hours at my job, and would usually get home sometime in the afternoon or night. On this night in particular, I left work sort of late. I just remember that I was tired and it had been a really long shift. I got back to my apartment, parked my car, and then went up to my place. When I went inside though, I realized that I had forgot my phone. It sometimes would fall out of my pocket when I was getting out of my car, usually on the driver's seat. I was annoyed but quickly left my place and went back down outside to the parking lot. I got my phone from inside of my car and then I went back in my apartment. After that, I was pretty tired. What I really wanted to do the most was just go to sleep, so I started to get ready for bed at that point. It was during this time that I thought I heard a noise from the other end of my apartment. I wasn't really 100% sure though because I was brushing my teeth. I didn't know for a fact if it was from inside my apartment or maybe from the neighbors next door. It really kind of sounded like it was from mine though. I stopped and then looked over but saw nothing. I didn't hear any other noises either, so I just continued to brush my teeth. After that, I went into my bedroom to go to sleep. Maybe it was because I was really tired, but I pretty much just completely brushed off the noise that I heard, or that I thought I heard. After going into my bedroom though, I was sure that I heard another noise. I couldn't really tell what exactly it was though. My lights were all off at this point now. I walked out of my bedroom and then I looked into the living room and kitchen area. The apartment was not that big, So if the lights were on, I would have been able to see the whole thing, but they were not. When I looked though, I saw that there was someone definitely walking through the living room towards the front end of the apartment. I was so surprised that I didn't know what to do for a second. I couldn't really see any details on them because all the lights were out, but I could just see the movement really. Then, as I was still standing there, I turned the light switch on. When I did, I suddenly saw a man who I did not recognize walking to the front door of my apartment. He quickly opened up the door and then went outside and left. After he was gone, I went over to the door and I locked it. I was so confused as to what had just happened. At first, I had no idea how the man got into my apartment, and I thought maybe he had been there all day. I figured that he had to have been hiding in the coat closet in order for me to not see him. I looked around and nothing was stolen or anything. I called the police and reported the incident. I was not tired at all anymore, but wide awake. When the police were there and I was talking to them, I remembered how I had forgot my phone in the car. When I went to get it, I was only gone for like a minute, if that, so I didn't lock my apartment door. That must have been how the man was able to get inside. I'm not sure if he had just been in the apartment building, or if he had maybe followed me home or something without me noticing. I hadn't been paying the greatest of attention to my surroundings. But after the police talked to me, they looked around the complex and were not able to find the man. I was really hoping that they would. Nothing else like that happened when I lived in the apartment. I moved and live in another apartment now.
Our official merch store is finally here. If you want to support more of our channel, check out our merch shop. The link is in the description down below. See you on the next video.